The financification of the economy and by the Federal Reserve is the fundamental problem of our time and our society. The problem with financification of the economy is when the tail wags the dog. Finance is the tail, the dog is engineering and products and services. Now, under the idea of free trade, free economy, and the Industrial Revolution, which started in the 17th century and proliferated itself until today, the idea of the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith and many other writers, and John Locke and the rationalists, the Scottish Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment, all of these ideas are all predicated on the concept of providing useful goods and services to your fellow citizens and have them vote for your business. And in that sense, I think we have had a good success as a species for the last 300 years. Poverty has been removed in many parts of the world. We've seen massive advancements in material wealth. We've seen advancements in moral and ethical technology. I think the world is a lot less harsher and definitely more fair than it was before. It's not perfect, but again, I think what we call capitalism, actually, which isn't capitalism really, but this idea that voluntary exchange of money and goods and services leads to a better life for everybody. This idea has helped us a lot. Unfortunately, we're not in that time anymore. We don't live in a situation like that. We have a much, much bigger problem to deal with. And the problem is the Federal Reserve and fiat money. Fiat money is when money, which is a technology that helps us allocate labor, that's what money actually is. If you assume that you need to invest labor into anything that is useful for humans, and then they buy that thing which is useful with money, the money is a technology to allocate labor. So if money is a technology to allocate labor and money is being issued by fiat, which means by government decree, and monopolized by the government, then we don't live in capitalism. Capitalism is a concept of the 19th century when the world was on the gold standard. What that means is that there's a limited amount of money, and the people who have it can do things that people who don't have it cannot do. And for better or for worse, that has led to massive improvements in many aspects of life, because the people who had the money, they were very careful with it. Actually, you can even go further back. When Alexander the Great was fighting his wars, one of the reasons why he could not continue conquering and expanding the Macedonian Empire was because he was running out of money. Many wars until maybe 100 years ago were actually limited by the availability of money. So when two kings went to war in 1700, they actually were limited by the amount of gold and silver that they had available to them in order to pay the armies and maintain their economies while they were at war. That has changed after central banking was invented, first in Europe and then later epitomized by the Federal Reserve in the United States, which coincided, of course, with the growth of the United States as a world power. What that means is that now you don't have any more limits of money, or at least the limits are much, much more blurred, because you can now issue paper money, which is what we call dollars or euros, and you can, more importantly, also allocate that money to whoever you want. And this is the world we're living in today, and that's why I started this episode with a financification of money. So take an example of what I mean with that. This is, let's imagine two worlds, and I always use this example. Imagine we split the United States into East and West along the Continental Divide, which is somewhere around Aspen in Colorado. West has adopted Bitcoin or something similar. So a scarce money that is a unit of account, a unit of transaction, but it's scarce in the sense that there's a limited amount of this stuff, and in order to get it, you have to produce goods and services and convince people to give you the Bitcoin in exchange for something that they deem useful, such as, for example, a house, a car, or food. Now imagine the East Coast is run by the Federal Reserve and the US dollar, and there the money is issued by the Federal Reserve, and therefore it is the US government and the Federal Reserve, and let's, for the sake of simplicity, just continue with the assumption that US government and Federal Reserve are the same entity. So the Federal Reserve issues the money, and then the people who get access to that money, which is Wall Street, they start allocating that money to whoever they deem or seem to like or think that should be done. So the point is the following: on the West Coast, in my opinion, you will have, and now let's run this rollout for maybe 50 years. You will have an economy on the West Coast which is driven by hard money, and it will therefore create a lot of innovation, because that's the only way that anybody in that economy can actually succeed and get access to power and money, which is to produce new creative ideas. Profiteering, crony capitalism, things along those lines will be possible, but much more difficult, because again, money is scarce, your tolerance for mistakes is very low, and anybody who has access to money will be very careful with how they allocate the money. As opposed to the East Coast, where money is basically free for those who have access to it, and that's again the government, the Federal Reserve, and the cronies, which are mainly the bankers, who are attached to the Federal Reserve money printing press, and they will decide who gets the money. And that's what I mean with the financification of the economy. It becomes almost upside down. Like, instead of having a project that is worth investing, the Wall Street bureaucrats, they just decide wherever they want to invest money, and then they sort of make up a project that actually makes sense so the money can be invested. So, for example, we have these situations like, for example, with OpenAI right now, which is there is a will on Wall Street that this company should continue to be important. And there are all these shenanigans which are being dreamed up in terms of financing just to make this project still viable. Versus on the West Coast, where the money is hard, a company like that would not get financing, and it would basically be folded into another company which gets financing. So that's just one example. Now, you might say, okay, why is this even important? Why do we care? Well, we care for many reasons. I mean, the fundamental reason why we care is, of course, we have massive amounts of government debt, which is a direct corollary of this ability to allocate money wherever you want. Because what happens with a fiat money system is that, and this, you can run this experiment in many different cultures in different time frames. It doesn't matter whether it's Rome or Greece or today. When you have fiat money and you have a government like we have in DC, whether it's democratic or not doesn't even matter. You will get crony capitalism. You will get corruption. You will get lots of debt, because that is the easiest way to tax people. So government debt is the easiest way to tax citizens. It's the most brutal, the most unfair, and the most harming way to tax people. But it's also the easiest way, and that's why we are in the situation that we are in. You don't have to be an economist to understand. Now, the problem with this situation is that the people who are in charge, which is the DC Wall Street power corridor, they are, of course, very aware of that, and they're also protecting this with everything they have. So, for example, there's a whole slew of economists being educated at our universities, so-called elite universities. I would say in most universities, the economics profession is the most sought after. Maybe sometimes engineering, like in big engineering schools like Berkeley or Michigan, is bigger, but typically economics is much bigger. And the economics profession is really, or you could think of the economics profession like a universal basic income, which is financed by the Fed, to propagate the ideas of fiat money. That's what economists do. And you can easily test this hypothesis. Just imagine you're an economist. Let's say you're a 2-year grad student at, let's say, Yale economics or Princeton or Berkeley, and you want to write a PhD thesis where you actually want to make the argument that I'm making, that we have an overfinanciation of the economy, that Keynesian economics is not working, and that we should go back to hard money and a system like Bitcoin. Most likely you will not find anybody to support your PhD. You will not get funding. You will just not be able to survive as an economist. Now, you can start a YouTube channel like some people did, or you can maybe join the Mises Institute or things like that, but those are fringe institutions relative to the massive apparatus that has been driven by the financification and that is now driving the financification of the economy. But let me be clear, the most damaging aspect of this whole system is, again, that there's two big damaging aspects. One is we have a gigantic misallocation of labor because we have all these people who actually spent 4, 8, 12 years studying economics in the wrong way. Economics is an important profession. I'm trained as an economist myself, and I find it very important. Like every aspect of our lives is touched by economics. It's important to think about what it means to allocate resources, what it means to organize a society properly, what it means to overextend the government, what it means to tax people. These are important. I think economics is a very, very important aspect of human study. The bigger and the more complex our economies get, and actually the most important contribution of economics is to say that fiat money is damaging. That is actually part of economics. The problem, of course, is this message is not being tolerated by the economics profession because it would hurt most of their jobs, whether it's a think tank in DC, whether it's all the people who work directly for the government or for the legislator, and then, of course, all the Wall Street people they don't just have universal basic income, they have universal high income, which is even worse, and they will, of course, fight tooth and nail to protect that. It is very, very damaging to see that stocks like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs over the last 5 years have outperformed many deep tech stocks, including Tesla or Microsoft or and not Nvidia, but a lot of other tech stocks, Apple even, you can argue about these companies whatever you want, but they are providing very useful products to the world. I've never, I've heard many times people say, look, the iPhone is very useful. People like it. Here in China, they like it. I've never heard anybody say, well, what JP Morgan does is very useful, because it's not. What JP Morgan does is allocate money that is printed by the Fed to some extent, maybe based on objective investment criteria, but mostly, of course, driven by either regulation and or crony capitalism type motivations, and in the meantime enriching themselves. Wall Street is a gigantic misallocation of capital and labor that is hurting the economy in both of those ways. So I think as a conclusion, and this is the end of 2025, so I don't want to give the year overviews and predictions. I don't want to do any of this. I just want to take stock and say, I want to say two things here. One is I'm disappointed at the Trump administration because when they got elected, they were supposed to remove some of that problem. They weren't running. Trump and his people weren't running on the Ron Paul type idea of abolishing the Fed. So they weren't, but they were running on the idea of draining the swamp. And that is, of course, the best way to drain the swamp will be to take away the Fed, which is the actual river, which is flooding the swamp. Now, if we don't want to do that, and there's people who can argue about this one way or the other, then at least we should get rid of corruption. And I think there's a recent interview I heard on the Macro Musings podcast, which I thought was really good, by this lady who actually works on the budget and studies the budget and things like that. And I think because she studies the budget, I think she's by nature already thinking the right way, because the way we are running our budget deficit is just not sustainable. But she said one important thing. She said, look, all these endeavors that we had, and this is just a side note, she should have given a bit more accolades to Elon Musk and Doge, but she didn't, because I guess she's a Democrat and she doesn't want to give any credit to anybody who's not a Democrat. But that's okay. I think her thoughts are important, because what she said is that, like, even if we cut some discretionary spending, even if that's not such a big deal in the big scheme of things, I think sending the message to people that the grafting and the profiteering has to stop, even that would be useful, but it did not succeed. So my point is, and this is the first thing I want to say, is I'm disappointed at the Trump administration for not draining the swamp and for not dealing with the over-financification of the economy. The second thing I want to say is that not just is the Trump administration not dealing with it, in fact, they're even helping. And to some extent, that's because Trump himself is a financier, and that's what a real estate speculator actually is. It's a financier. So I can see where he's coming from. But I guess most importantly now, how do we get out of this? Like, I'm a father of a son, so I have a stake in the future of this society. I have a stake in my own future, but more importantly, I have a stake in the future of my kids, my grandchildren, and so forth. And I see it as my main duty as a human being to leave this world a better place than when I entered it. And I already entered it. It was a pretty good place. I was born in Switzerland after World War II with very capable parents. So I was given, I definitely won the ovary lottery, and I think I want to leave this place in a better than I inherited it. And these are the kinds of contribution I want to do. I want to make money and then channel my knowledge and my money into better projects and better, more impactful projects for the future of this world. So what I want to do is I want to offer some solution. I think the best solution for us as a species to have a shot at surviving this almost cancerous financification of the economy is to gradually shift away from the dollar towards Bitcoin. I think I can't see any other solution. The good news is that we have the economy to support that. And what do I mean with that? Like, let's say if I went to Zimbabwe now, or Vietnam, or I don't know, Australia even, like countries like that, where the economy is relatively basic. And I'm sorry for the Australians here. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there's not a lot of innovation. There is a very limited amount of new things happening. Just look at the stock markets of Australia. Look at the stock markets of Europe. Look at the stock markets of, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or whatever. They're always the same companies. There isn't much innovation. Versus, of course, here in the US and to some extent in China, there are new things happening. So when you have new things happening, you can switch from fiat money to hard money, because the driver of progress is not, this crony allocation of money and this central planning. It is actually what Adam Smith and all his philosophy cousins and brothers and sisters were talking about. It is this voluntary exchange of products and services based on innovation, based on people actually doing things that are useful for other things. So we can switch. Now, how we can do this and whether this can happen in California or Texas, that's a big question, because California as an economy is incredibly innovative, but as a state, it's actually the most backward state in the union. It's corrupt. It's run by cronies, and we're basically hijacked by a left-wing elitocracy that is suffocating the state. So that's an open question. But I still think, I guess my conclusion here is that we need a segregation in some shape or form. We need it here, we need it in Europe. This big state, central government, central bureaucracy, central financing, ECB and Federal Reserve, is suffocating our economies and our innovation. So we need to segregate this, and we need hard money in order to drain the swamp. Thank you.